All right. Hey, out on the patio, grab your donut. Come on in. Hopefully, if you haven't got a chance to grab a snack, we got some Christmas baked stuff, some good stuff here on the patio today. Grab that as you're coming in. Come on in. Welcome to you online. We're so glad that you are with us. We are going to be doing communion at the end of the service. So I want to encourage you to go ahead and grab something from the kitchen right now so that you can be prepared for that. If you didn't get those, you can grab those from one of the ushers. If you're here in the room, through one of the doors, they have them as well. If you are new with us, we're so glad that you can be with us this morning. I'm guessing if you're here this morning in the room, that means you don't care about the World Cup and you got eliminated from your fantasy football playoffs already. So we're glad that you're here with us. We are going to have a great morning. If you are new, we'd love for you to stop by our Connect table after the service. We've got a lot going on here at Beachpoint. We'd love to be able to connect you and tell you a little bit more about what's going on. This is a busy week for us. We want to encourage you. This week, Christmas week, we have services on Friday night. We are here at 4 p.m. One service in here, and then we're out on the patio. We've got food, we've got photo booths, we got games, we got all kinds of fun stuff that is going to be happening. So this Friday at 4 p.m. Saturday, Christmas Eve, we have services at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And Sunday, Christmas Day, there are no morning services. There is one service in here at 4 p.m. and then dinner is served in the pavilion afterwards. We're doing a combined service with Redemption Point. We will both our churches will be together to do Christmas service Sunday at 4 p.m. And then New Year's Day also, same thing. No morning services, but we have one service, 4 p.m. in here. And then we will be out in the pavilion afterwards for dinner. So if you were here with us last week, our gentle reminder to you is if you can't remember a lot of details this week, all you need to remember is one thing, 4 p.m. Where do you need to be during any of those times? Just be here at 4 p.m. and then you will be fine. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then the following Sunday as well. Finally, want to just make sure you know about Project Hope. We have been starting to deliver things already, and it has been exciting to be able to visit and meet with some of the partners that we have. We're continuing to do that this week. We're sending funds to our missionaries around the world. They're incredibly thankful to you for your generosity. One of the things you can do, you can scan the QR code up on the screen, or you can grab one of these cards out on the patio. But these, we have three new families, all fleeing domestic violence situations, and we're trying to help them out. If you're able to, we'd love for you to be able to pick up one of those families. Or the simplest thing really from this point on is you can give generously to our Christmas offering, and that is really helping us do incredible things, literally all over the world, here in Huntington Beach, and all over the globe as we work with our missionaries. Our missionaries are, they're friends. They're people that grew up here in our church, and they are all over serving the Lord. And so I encourage you to be a part of that. But we've got a great Christmas morning scheduled for you. So why don't we stand together? Let's begin a time of worship together.
nature sing. And nature sing. All heaven and all creation sing the wonders of His love. All heaven and all creation sing the wonders of His love. All heaven and all creation sing the wonders of His love. All heaven and all creation sing the wonders of His love. The wonders of His love. His love, His love,
There is a sound, it's the sound of the Savior's robe as He walks into the room where people pray, where we hear praises, He hears faith. There is a sound I love to hear. It's the sound of the Savior's
His kingdom come, our great inheritance, to show the way, the highest expanse. This king, he rules as our own king. Come take your place right next to him. Majesty, give praise to the one who offers more than moon and the sun. Oh God of endless fame, whose royalty is vast, is singing out your name to enter in at last.
Behold, behold.
That's a fun one, and plug for original Beachpoint. Owe that one to Mitch and Sandra, and I love it. So go find it online. But yeah, as we move into this next song, I just want to pray real quick. I know for myself, I was very engrossed in the World Cup match that was just happening. I don't know how that just ended in the shootout, so I'm trying to separate that from my mind at the moment. But we're about to do "Be Thou My Vision," which is it's a fun one. I haven't personally done it in a while. It really made me think coming into this. Saying that someone's your vision, like, there's a lot of power behind that, right? Like, what does that actually mean if you think about it? It's this idea that when you're not really, there's nothing in your head, right? That's just the thing that you see. This is my vision. This is everything. I'm focused on this alone. And so let me pray real quick to try to get us in that mindset. God, we thank you so much for what you're doing here this morning. Thank you for your presence. We thank you for what you meant to the world when you came 2,000 years ago. I pray right now that as we remember your birth and everything that surrounds it, God, that you would truly be our vision this morning, that we would push away the other things, help us to focus and see you when we close our eyes, see you in everything that we do. Amen.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. And be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word, and I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, I thy true Son, thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Riches I need not, nor man's empty praise. Thou my inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, oh ruler of all. Sing that again. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, oh ruler of all. Amen.
guys can be seated.
We're going to start this morning with a survey of sorts, which is this. I want a show of hands. How many of us have, on a Sunday morning, I'll say in any context, heard someone preach about Matthew 2 when Herod slaughters the innocents in Matthew chapter 2? Show of hands, okay, cool. Guess what, everyone? Everyone's hands are going up today because that's what we're about to do. So, but we're gonna look, as we've been in this series thinking about beholding your King, right? We've spent these past couple weeks thinking about what does it look like to see Jesus as our King? And we come to this week and we have this way to think about this week, to think about the way that there are things in each of our lives that will compete for the throne with Jesus. That if we're going to declare that Jesus is the King of our lives, there's going to be things that compete with Jesus as King of our lives. And how are we supposed to respond to those things, to those conflicts? How do we protect Jesus's seat on the throne of our hearts? And so we're going to look at this Christmas story that we don't look at very often around Christmas in Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 13 here in a second. And we see Herod the Great at this point. He's trying to compete with Jesus for the kingdom of Judea in his mind, right? We saw last week, if you were here, and Pastor Bumble kind of started us off thinking about with the story of the Magi, and they came through and they visited Herod, and then Herod sent them off to go find this boy king that had been born, right? And the Magi realized they shouldn't go back to Herod because Herod's plan was to kill this king. And so they went a different route. And we pick up this story now with Herod basically realizing effectively that he had been tricked here in Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 13. It says, when they had gone, they being the Magi, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Right, you can see why we usually skip this portion of the Christmas story, right? It doesn't give us the feeling that Christmas is supposed to give us, that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling with like hot cocoa in hand that we expect out of the Christmas season. This isn't, if you've got a Hallmark movie that looks like this, it's not a very good Hallmark movie, right? And so this is not what we expect in this moment. We aren't supposed to spend Christmas thinking about basically like these bloodthirsty rulers who are competing for power and willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to their throne. And yet, here the story is, right in the middle of the story of Christmas, right in the middle of the cute story that we're so used to. And what we want to see is that from the beginning, there were things that were competing with Jesus for the throne. It's easy for us to hear the exhortation, right? Behold your king. And to hear it as a sort of like fun Christmas season thing that we might say, right? It does kind of give us those feelings like our king is here, that's fun, that's exciting. But then you see that in that world, that wasn't a warm Christmas greeting. That was a powerful declaration that a new king had entered the world. And Herod was not happy about that. This was a threat to him directly. And so he responded by doing horrible things, by sending his soldiers to go to Bethlehem, a town that we think was about 600 people at the time, and having his men kill all of the children 2 years and younger in this town. It's a horrifying thing to imagine. And the angel though, warned Joseph before that this was going to happen, right? And in verse 19, the story goes on. It says, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. So he got up, took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Okay, in this moment, what we see is that Joseph led the family away from Herod, right? Joseph listened, he followed, he protected Jesus in this moment. And it struck me as we were kind of getting ready for this service, thinking about, I've sung the Christmas carol. I think it's angels we have heard on high that Mary, Joseph lend their aid is the line. And I've always, what does that even mean? And yet I'm struck here in this moment by here's Joseph lending his aid to Jesus. The fact that he was willing to hear what was commanded of him, and he went and he did it. And when the angel called them back, he came back. And what I want us to think about this morning is that as we approach Christmas declaring that Jesus is the King of our lives, we have to then expect there to be some competition for that. There's always going to be things competing for the throne in your life. That's always going to be the case. Just like Herod was competing with Jesus for the throne as he saw it 2,000 years ago. And Herod was no stranger to fighting for thrones and things like that, okay? And if we want to understand the story in Matthew 2, I think we have to understand a little bit about Herod, who Herod was and what Herod was like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to step into my classroom for a second, okay, here. But I'm going to be honest, I haven't gone to preach in a couple months because I've gotten sick like every time I've been supposed to preach, which means I have to get all the nerdy things out at once here. So we're just gonna buckle up and we're gonna go through it today. And we've got here my classroom set up. So here we go. But Herod the Great was the first of the Herodian kings, okay, named after him. He starts this line, and he took the throne from the Hasmonean kings who'd ruled for just about 200 years before him. And we want to understand just a little bit about his life. And so what we start to know about Herod in 47 BCE, because he got appointed the Roman governor of Galilee. And his job there was basically just to oversee the tax collectors for Rome. He was a very small, provincial sort of political figure, no real success, no real prominence. But he started to get ambitious. And in 41, he actually ended up abandoning his first wife, Doris, and their son, Antipater, because he wanted to get for himself a more politically advantageous marriage. He wanted to marry someone who would get him access to power. And so he abandoned them, and then he actually banished them with what little power he had. So it wasn't just like a, I'm leaving you, it's you also have to leave Israel type situation. And so he banished them away. And his career kind of goes on, and it's whatever. And then in 39, something bad happens to Herod, which is that a civil war broke out in Israel. And the king that he had been loyal to lost. So Herod found himself on the outside of the political world. And so he went to Rome, on a trip to Rome, to beg the Roman Senate to send an army to make the old king again. Out of the kindness of his heart, not because it benefited him at all, of course, right? And so when he got to Rome and he appeared before the Senate and he asked them to do this, the Senate just decided in that moment, big surprise in that moment for Herod, they were just going to make Herod king of Judea instead. So the Senate voted in that moment to make him king and put him in charge of going back and securing the throne for himself. So now Herod leaves Rome, the appointed king of Judea, traveled back to Rome in that moment. Back to Jerusalem, to Israel. He got back. He married this woman named Mariamne, who was the daughter of the old king, to try to get that power for himself, right? He got the marriage that he wanted in the first place. And then he defeated his rival. In 37, he takes the throne for himself. He made himself king of Judea, in part on accident, in part because he was willing to do whatever it took to get there. And so in about 10 years' time, he went from being this tiny little nobody in a tiny little piece of Israel to being the Roman client king of Judea, to having all this power and authority in the region. But Herod wasn't done at this point, okay? This wasn't the end of Herod's story, because he got himself tangled up in another civil war. Maybe we're familiar with, have we all read Julius Caesar or seen Julius Caesar at some point in time? Wow, surprisingly few of us. Okay, sorry guys, yeah. So there's a civil war in Rome between Mark Antony and Cleopatra on one side and Octavian on the other, right? And everyone in the empire had to choose a side. It's this massive civil war. And Herod chose Mark Antony, okay? And I wanna be really clear here. Mark Antony, not Mark Anthony, okay? I worked really hard on this in Photoshop to cover J-Lo with Mark Antony, and it like mostly worked. But they have this civil war, and Herod chose Mark Antony's side. And then Herod's mother-in-law thought this was a good opportunity to see Herod done away with. She didn't like him very much. And so she starts plotting his assassination with her best friend. And so Herod assassinated his mother-in-law's best friend in 35 BCE, okay? And I don't know what, you're going to family Christmas in a week or so, right? I don't know what that's like, but assassinating your mother-in-law's best friend is probably not the ticket to a smooth family Christmas experience. And so he gets himself involved in this war. And then in 31, Mark Antony loses. And for the second time in his life, Herod finds himself on the outside. And Octavian, who's about to become Caesar Augustus, starts going around the empire, rounding up every single person who sided against him and arresting them and executing them. Except for Herod. Because somehow what Herod does was he presented himself to Octavian, and we don't know what he offered him. We don't know what he promised him. But they come out of that meeting, and Octavian says, Herod is still the king of Judea. He's the only one who stays in his position. And so Herod goes back, having lost the civil war, and people smelled blood in the water in this moment in Herod's life. People thought this was their chance to get rid of him in Judea. And so Herod begins his sort of reign of terror in this moment, where he's going to do whatever it takes to hold on to the throne. And so in 29 BCE, he arrested his wife Mariamne and had her executed without cause, just because he was worried about her. About 20 years later, in 7 BCE, he arrested his second and third sons, the sons he'd had with Mariamne, had them executed because they were a threat to the throne. In 4 BCE, he went and he found his son Antipater, who he'd exiled and banished away like 40 years ago, and had him arrested and executed. Like, that's a terrible, terrible, you had to go find your son and then execute him is really not great. This is who Herod was. Herod would have done whatever it took. This story in Matthew 2 is not outside of his character. It's not some bizarre left turn in his life. This is what Herod did. This is what Herod's life looked like, was him fighting for power no matter what. Right? He was no stranger to this game of kings and kingdoms and power struggles. This scene in Matthew 2 is just the most recent example of it we have. And what I want us to think about this morning is that each and every one of us has Herods in our lives that are competing for the throne of our life today. Each and every single one of us has a Herod that's just as bloodthirsty, just as power hungry, just as committed to holding on to the throne of your life as Herod the Great was. Your greed is a Herod that sees Jesus as a threat to its place on the throne. And it would be willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to that place. the expectations of others or your need to meet those expectations, sees Jesus as a threat to its ability to hold the throne in your life, and they will lie through their teeth to make sure that they stay on the throne of your life and not Jesus. Your need for achievement and success and to be able to say that you accomplished something sees Jesus as a threat to its place on the throne of your life, and that need will kill whatever relationship or calling you have on your life if it means that it can stay in power compared to Jesus. Your control, your desire for approval, your constant focus on your own comfort, the need to avoid conflict, the money you want to possess, the status you want to achieve, all of it can be a Herod in your life. A Herod just like this, willing to do whatever it takes to hold on to the throne of your heart. And so if we're going to say that Jesus is the king of our lives, then if we're going to say that he's the king of our lives, then we're going to behold Jesus as our king, we're going to have to figure out what does it look like then for us to respond to these Herods? What does it look like for us to protect this throne for Jesus? And I think we can take two strategies from Joseph's example. The first is to flee from your Herods. To flee from your Herods, right? That you should flee and not fight these things in your life. When the angel appeared to Joseph and told him that Herod was intending to kill Jesus, right? Joseph's response wasn't to run out in that moment and to get a suit of armor and a sword or to go out in the town square and rally support for his cause. Joseph's response was to run, to literally flee to Egypt. And yet so often when we find ourselves face to face with these things, we want to fight the Herods in our lives. We want to do battle with them, right? We think that with sheer willpower, mind over matter in some sort of way, we can defeat whatever is encroaching on Jesus' throne in our lives, right? You're struggling with greed, fight it. You're struggling with addiction, you fight it. You're struggling with meeting people's expectations, you fight it. That's what you're supposed to do. But here's the thing, is that the Herods in your life are survivors just like Herod the Great. The Herods in your life are bloodthirsty just like Herod the Great. And if we try to fight these things, there's a chance that we lose. That we actually fail, we lose the battle. That's why I think in 1 Corinthians 6, the Apostle Paul actually said this. He told the Corinthians to flee from sexual immorality, right? To flee from it. And that word that Paul used there for flee is this Greek word fugo, okay? Which means like quite literally to run away from something or someone, okay? Fugo. And you see it in like the Iliad. Hector fugos away from Achilles in the Iliad, or an army would fugo away from the opposing army when they'd been defeated in battle, or the people would fugo away from the barbarian hordes when they were left defenseless, right? And it wasn't some orderly retreat. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal. This was running for your life. No sense of shame, no sense of how you look or the appearance that you might give off. This was just a panicked flight, a panicked running away. In Matthew 2 here, when Joseph took his family, it says that he fugoed with them to Egypt. He fled with them to Egypt in this moment. So when you're confronted with a Herod in your life, confronted by something that's seeking to compete with Jesus for the throne of your life, the strategy for protecting Jesus' place on that throne is to flee, to run away from it. It's to fugo away from that Herod, just as Joseph did, just as Paul encouraged the Corinthians to do. To run away. And that's the advice that we give teenagers usually, right? If you're raising teenagers or you've raised teenagers, you probably are familiar with this advice that when they're struggling with something, whether it's a temptation that we think is a Herod or something like that, our advice is, remove yourself from that situation, right? Your friends are leading you in a bad direction. Don't be friends with those people. You're struggling with the temptations on your phone all the time? Well, don't take your phone in your room with you where no one else knows what you're doing on it. You're struggling with boundaries that you've set in your relationships and crossing those boundaries? Well, don't be alone with that person like that. That's the advice we give to teenagers all the time. It's basically flee from that thing. Don't put yourself in that position. Get away from that context. We give that advice all the time. But suddenly when it comes to our Herods, we're a lot less quick to give that advice. We're a lot less quick to tell someone or to tell ourselves that we have to flee from something in our lives. Right? When's the last time you heard someone talking about struggling with feeling like they want more money, more and more and more, and you heard someone's response be, hey, you know what you should do? You should delete all the investment apps off your phone. Just get rid of them all. When's the last time you heard someone talking about it's so hard, like our schedule is so impacted with stuff right now. There's something all the time. Our kids' schedule is so impacted right now. There's something all the time, and you heard someone respond to them and say, hey, you know what you should do? You should flee from that. Let's just wipe that out and start over. When it comes to our Herods in life, our response is a little different. We go from saying like, yeah, flee from that thing, it's bad, to we'll say, yeah, that's really difficult to balance that out. That's really tough to find the balance on that. In part because I think at some level we think that we can allow both the Herod and Jesus to sit on the throne of our lives at the same time, but also in part because we don't think the Herod is bad in the first place. We don't think that thing is a Herod in our life. We think that it's a good thing in our life sometimes, right? And the challenge is even Herod the Great got the name Herod the Great somehow. He did stuff that was great. And there's things in our lives that do things that are great, that appear great to us. And the reality is we don't want to give those things up. We don't want to let Jesus take the throne from those things. Maybe they started off great, but they've become something else. It's our desire for our kids to succeed that started off in a good way, but now it's an idol for us. That they have to succeed in a certain way, in a specific thing. Maybe it's our searching for security and stability, which starts off great, but at some point it gets to this place where we won't be willing to give up security and stability if that's what Jesus calls us to. It's our desire for maintaining peace that begins off well enough, but it eventually gets to the point where we won't allow any conflict in our lives, even if it's conflict that Jesus invites us into. And yet the strategy that Joseph modeled for us is to flee. It's to flee from your greed, to flee from your selfishness, to flee from your need to be in control, to flee from your idolatry, to flee from your lust, to flee from that craving for success, even to flee from things that might look like good things in our lives, but we realize we've allowed them to take the throne, to hold on to it, to not let Jesus have the throne any longer. And once you've fled from those things, once you've found your way away from those things, once you've found your way into Egypt to get away from those things, there's something more we have to do. Right? We have to find the space and the time to listen for and follow God's direction, to hear what God is inviting us into, right? Mary and Joseph and Jesus, we know they lived about 3 years in Egypt. They spent about 3 years there before returning. And the story doesn't end with them in Egypt. Right? They fled, and then they listened for what God called them into. And so often I think that this is the step where we get stuck, we get hung up on this point, because it's so easy for us to characterize the Christian life as a life that's defined by abstaining from things. By being, that there's certain things that are absent from our lives, right? That there's bad things that we don't do, or things that not necessarily, they're not bad necessarily, but we just don't do those things. That's what it means to be Christian. A few weeks ago, I was here in this room, and we kind of had a space open. We were hosting a space in here for some people who aren't really connected to the church. And I was sitting in the corner praying and listening to them kind of talk, like trying not to eavesdrop, but also eavesdropping. And one of the people, they're adults, they were all adults, and there was probably about 8 of them in a circle, and one of them started to say some like really profane things. Which, like, if you're seeing, I don't know if the holiness of like that portion of the worship center has been scarred or not, but and what struck me was that almost everyone around her very quickly jumped on her and kind of said like, hey, you can't say that, this is a church. Like God couldn't handle like whatever it was that she was saying in the first place, but they all jumped on her. And it struck me as I was sitting back there that for most of those people, their concept of the Christian life is a life that's abstaining from things like cussing. That's what it means to be a Christian. That's what being a Christian looks like. And of course, there's things that as followers of Jesus, we're called to abstain from. There's things that we're called to be absent from our lives. Jesus has plenty of those things. He tells us, Paul has plenty of those things. The law and the prophets have plenty of things that we're supposed to abstain from, that we're supposed to not have in our lives. But at the same time, the Christian life isn't a life that's just marked by abstaining from things. It's not just having a life being absent of bad things. It's that we have taken up this life that Jesus invites us into. There's an invitation into something more in this life. A call into something more in this life. And if we want to know what Jesus is calling us into, right? If we don't want to live our lives in Egypt, we don't want to spend the rest of our lives having just fled from our Herods, being absent of Herods, but having not taken up anything else, we have to listen for the direction that God has for us. We have to be willing to listen to hear what God has for us next in these moments. And that's tricky right now, because it's Christmas time, right? It's Christmas season. How am I supposed to listen? How much listening are we even really doing in this moment? Just this past week, Jude came up to me for like the 37th time. And he said, Dad, I want to add this to my Christmas list. It's like a Star Wars astromech droid from Disneyland, which, and so, and I was like, it's early enough in the morning and I wasn't super paying attention. I kind of said, yeah, buddy, we'll put it on the list. And then he kind of ran off and he came back and he kind of mumbled the same like thing to me. And I responded to him. I said, buddy, yeah, I'll put it on the list and we'll see, okay? And he looked at me and he snapped at me and he said, Dad, I said Luca took her diaper off. And I realized at that moment that I had so tuned out after the first time he asked that he came back and what he was telling me was that our 2-year-old was running around the house naked with no diaper on. And I just assumed in that moment we were still talking about the Christmas list. And around Christmas, it's so easy for us to get into that mindset, to get into like that Christmas parenting mindset even, where we're not really listening in the right sort of ways. We don't listen well in this season. There's so much going on. We're too focused on too many things at once. How can we stop to listen? And yet that's the beauty of Christmas in so many ways, is that in the middle of this mundane, everyday business of life, Jesus broke through into this world. That he entered into this world in this moment. You think about all the characters of the Bible, the Christmas story, from Mary and Joseph to the shepherds to Anna and Simeon, they were all just going about their regular lives when Jesus entered into the picture. Mary and Joseph were a young couple about to be married. Think about how much was going through their minds at that point in time, how busy they were at that point in time, and Jesus entered in. The shepherds were out doing their work in the fields, doing their job when the angels showed up. They were busy. They were doing their job. They were doing what was expected of them. It would have been easy for them to say, we're too busy for what God has for us in this season. Anna and Simeon were two old birds who hung out in the temple all the time. It would have been easy for them to be so focused in on all the countless other people in the temple that they missed out on Jesus, and yet they saw him there. They let Jesus break through instead. And if you want Jesus to break through into your life this Christmas, then you're gonna have to make space to listen and follow through on God's direction for your life, to actually hear what God has for you. Maybe it comes as a vision of an angel like Joseph. I don't think it's all that common. My guess is that much more likely is that it will come through time spent reading the Bible, asking God to lead you, through time spent in prayer, praying for your friends, for your 8 to 15, for your family in this season, in time spent in community with people who are asking you like how they can be a help to you, of people you are asking how you can be a help to them. It's gonna come in all sorts of ways. This past year, I think, I have spent this past year, I've listened to God more this past year than I ever have in a disciplined fashion before in my life. I think it's okay to admit that, hopefully. But I realized I've read my Bible in a more disciplined fashion. I've prayed in a more disciplined fashion. I've been in community in a more disciplined fashion, more than at any other point in my life. And so the other day I was in the office and I wanted to brag about that, right? Like I was gonna brag about my accomplishment. And so we were all talking and I was waiting for my opportunity to get this out there in the office. And finally the time came. And so I said, yeah, I'm really proud of myself. Like I've read 12 books this year and I've read the whole New Testament and the Psalms. And I was like really proud of this accomplishment, okay? Like I've done it. I'm holier than Jackie and I've nailed it. And so this is the moment of success, right? And then I heard Bill from like behind me, okay? And Bill goes, that's it? Which like that, welcome to our work environment for one on that front. But, I decided, in the moment it hurt a little. I've decided now I'm gonna take it as a win. I'm going to take my discipline success for this year as a win still. But there's room to grow for next year still, I guess, to make Bill happy. But I think if we want to be people who are going to listen for God's direction, we have to be disciplined about it. We have to be willing to make it a discipline, a routine in our lives, to have a discipline of actually reading the Bible, a discipline of actually praying, a discipline of actually being in community together. Not because the Bible is some like magic book that's going to talk to you, okay? It's not like the Christian version of Tom Riddle's diary. It's not going to do that. But because when we spend our time reading the Bible, when we spend our time in prayer, when we spend our time in community, it shapes our lives. It helps us see the life that Jesus is calling us into, the life that he's inviting us into, not just the things that should be absent from our lives, but the things that he's trying to build in our lives. We see how Jesus interacts with people, and we then have those same interactions. We see how Jesus meets people in their hurting, and we have those same interactions. We see how Jesus is with people and present with people, and we live those things out. It's a constant dance of listening and acting and listening and acting and listening and acting, spending time in the Bible, spending time in prayer, spending time with community, putting it all into practice. And there's no reason for you not to start now, right? Maybe you've already started and that's great. If not, there's no reason not to start now, right? We're all so tempted right now. This is the season of, I wanna start doing something, but I'm gonna wait 14 days until January 1st to start doing it, right? This is my last hurrah at eating what I want, of doing what I want. This is it. Why? Why wait 2 more weeks? Why wait another 7 days? Why not start now with these things? Right? What if you got to Christmas in a week with a 7-day streak of reading your Bible? What if you got to Christmas with a 7-day streak of having started your morning with 10 minutes of praying for the people in your life? What if you got to Christmas with a 7-day streak of starting your day by texting a friend who you know is hurting and just encouraging them in some way? I think that would make your next 7 days better. It would make your next year better. There's no reason to wait until January 1st to change things. There's Herods in your life right now that you can flee from. There's things that God is trying to invite you into right now that you can listen for. You don't have to wait to start at some other point in time. So we want to invite you today to think about, how can you protect Jesus as the king of your life this week? Starting this week, how can you protect Jesus as the king of your life? What are the Herods that you need to flee from now? What are the ways that you need to be listening for God right now? Hearing his direction in your life. And if you're feeling down about it, I know it's easy for us sometimes to beat ourselves up about ways we fall short in these sorts of ways. I have these Herods in my life and I feel bad about it. I'm not listening the way I should and I feel bad about it. And sometimes that's conviction and that's good. We can let that guide us. But if it shouldn't be hopeless. It's not the kind of thing that should lead us to feel hopeless in this sort of way. And I think it's so perfect for us that we're gonna end this time in communion together as a reminder that it's not hopeless, that the king that we have in Jesus isn't a king who looks at us and thinks, how dare you? Right? How you've fallen so far short. Instead, we have a king in Jesus that despite our sin, despite our failures, despite our mistakes, is still just waiting for us to make him the king of our lives, who continues to open the door for us again and again and again, who's willing to sacrifice himself for us. And so in a moment, we're gonna take communion together, and as we do, I wanna invite you to think about the Herods in your life. Think about those Herods in your life that it's time for you to flee from. Think about the ways that you could be listening for what God has for you in the next 7 days, this next week, and bring it all to Jesus right now. In 1 Corinthians, Paul said that the Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he'd given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So take some time, and when you're ready, eat and drink in remembrance of him.
So as we transition into this last song, feel free to take whatever posture feels right for you in this moment. Finish up communion if that's what you're doing. But otherwise, feel free to stand with us as well.
So as we go this morning, we want to invite you to think about the Herods in your life. What can you flee from today? How can you be listening for what God has for you today? But also, to be reminded that there's hope in Jesus. There's hope that comes at Christmas, that he is God with us through it all. And so we'd love to invite you. If you need some prayer, we can pray for you up here in the front as well. But we'd also love to worship with you on Christmas Eve on the 23rd and the 24th. We'd love to see you here. So go this morning in the knowledge of the love that Jesus has for you.